Welcome to Stories After Midnight. Today we're going to be reading My Siblings and I Didn't Cry at Our Dad's Funeral because we are getting his inheritance. This story is by Trash Tia. I hope you enjoy it, and a huge shout out to my patrons for helping make this episode possible. Let's get started. I've always been the odd one out among my siblings. From a very young age, we learned how to play Dad's games. For example, on each of our birthdays, a simple question would be left at our place at the table, and as Maybank children, it was our job to crack it. For my 6th birthday, I still needed help from Mom and Dad. I found an ancient painting in the hallway, where a key was taped to the back. That led us to a secret box in the living room, containing all of my wrapped birthday gifts. However, I was never involved in the basement games that only my brothers and sisters were allowed to play. It's not that I was the least favorite child or treated badly. We were all treated equally. But when it came time to playing games with Dad, I wasn't allowed to join in. Instead, I would promptly be handed an iPad and told to stay in my room. I was a little kid, so I never processed anger or resentment. I never proclaimed to be smart. I figured there was a reason. Maybe it was too dusty in the basement. I did have allergies, so that made sense. Mom told me it was dangerous down there. If I wasn't careful, I could slip on the cement staircase and hit my head. And no matter how many times I reassured myself, I couldn't understand why it was them and not me. At first, I didn't mind. I watched YouTube and played games until Mom came to get me for dinner. But then it started happening more often, sometimes for entire days. I was expected to stay in my room while Dad played hide and seek with the others. Dad was rich, though I didn't realize how wealthy he was until I got older. I was under the naive impression that every 7-year-old had their own private chef. Of course, it wasn't our wealth. It was Dad's. The 4 of us grew up in a pretty big house, an ancient boarding school refurbished into a modern family home. It was the perfect setting for the endless games of hide and seek. When I did join in with my siblings, it was a lot of fun. But then Dad started excluding me and moving the games to the basement, complete with his new rules. The rules stated that each of them had to participate after breakfast until dinner. They couldn't leave the basement under any circumstances, and I wasn't allowed to join. I felt harsh, but I wasn't a confrontational kid, so I stayed quiet. Then one night, my little sister Mari climbed into my bed. I was used to it. There was a spider on her ceiling maybe a year prior, and since then she was convinced the spider's eggs were going to crawl into her mouth. She wrapped her arms around me, her body trembling, and whispered that she was scared. Mari didn't talk about the basement games, but as she leaned closer, her icy breath brushed my ear. I could hear the slight tremble in her voice. "I don't like the basement game anymore, Belle," she whispered, burying her head in my pillow, hiding in a halo of tangled red curls. Mari was so cold, shivering in her ice cream-themed pajamas. Dad had taken them down to the basement at breakfast, and they missed lunch. I asked our chef Stella if I could take them California rolls for a snack. Stella seemed happy to help, letting me pour them onto a plate and count 3 each for my siblings, and an extra one for me. But Mom was quick to swoop into the kitchen and snatch the plate off of Stella. "I'll take them," Mom chirped with a wide smile and too many teeth. I nodded and went to watch cartoons, but when I joined Mom and Dad in the dining room for dinner, I noticed the California rolls still sitting there, untouched on the bright green plate I'd piled them on. "Where's Stella?" I asked, trying to ignore her emptying the stale rolls into the trash. Mom was quick to steer me into the dining room, sitting me down. She set a glass of juice in front of me. "Stella has gone home early," she said, running her fingers through my hair. "She's not feeling very well." But I never saw Stella again. We had a new chef the next day, Dimitri. I didn't like asking too many questions because Mom and Dad always lied when they smiled. When I asked about my brothers and sister, the 2 of them wore wide, permanent grins they used especially for me. I went to bed, my tummy hurting. The 3 of them had been down there all day, and it wasn't until Mari crept into my room did the vicious knot in my gut start to loosen. They had finally come out of the basement. I felt myself start to relax, sinking into my pillow and my sister's embrace, before a thought hit me. Roman and Nick. I didn't hear their footsteps pound past my bedroom, and I knew I would have heard them. Our two brothers were always too loud, always making noise and bouncing on their beds at bedtime. Nick was older than me by a year, so he usually instigated it, while Roman was younger, copying everything he did. The morning prior, Nick announced to everyone he was done eating vegetables. Ignoring the maid's hiss for him to sit down, he jumped onto a chair, making a scene. "I'm 8 years old now, and I'm old enough to know that vegetables suck." Roman, 2 years younger than him and obsessed with copying every little thing he did, was halfway through a plate of broccoli before jumping up, exclaiming, "Me too!" through a mouthful of mushy green. I lay on my side, resting my head on my favorite elephant plushie. "Did our brothers come back upstairs too?" I whispered. I didn't like the faraway, dazed look in my sister's eyes. I had to repeat the question before she finally stared at me, blinking rapidly. Mari shook her head. Illuminated by the glow of my bedside lamp, my little sister's eyes grew wide with fear, stray strands of red hair clinging to her cheeks. She grabbed my blankets and threw them over herself, crawling underneath and using me for warmth. Mari usually climbed into my bed when she was feeling sick or had watched a scary movie. Reaching for my plushie, she hugged it tightly to her chest for comfort. I was usually very strict about her touching my stuffed animals, but for this one time I let her hold on to him for a little longer, before tugging him from her grasp. "No," she said softly. "They haven't won the game yet." I sat up, but Mari didn't move, snuggling into my blankets. "What?" Mari whimpered, and it was then when I realized she was crying. "Dad isn't letting them through the door," she squeaked, squeezing her hands into fists. "The monster is going to eat them." I shivered when she pressed herself against me. Mari was freezing cold. I threw my legs over my bed, jumping out. "Is the monster part of the basement game?" There was a pause before she sniffled. "Yes." Something slimy crept its way up my throat, my tummy twisting into knots. As Mari's big sister, I had an unspoken, unofficial job to protect her, even if, at that point, I really didn't want to see the monster in the basement. It was usually Nick's job to protect all of us, but with him stuck downstairs playing the basement game, I had to put on my big girl pants and do it myself. I tucked my sister into my bed. "Do you want me to go check on them?" Mari didn't respond, but she did jerk her head slightly, so I grabbed my iPad as a flashlight, pulling it from my stuffed animal drawer. Mom made it clear I was not allowed to use it after curfew, except for emergencies, and this was definitely an emergency. I left Mari in my room, creeping through the gap in the door. I took a moment to check my brother's rooms. Roman's was empty, a book still spread open on his unmade bed. Nick's bed was made, but I noticed his room was too clean. Usually it was a mess, books and clothes and play slime covering the floor. But everything was clean. His books were nearly organized, all of his toys piled into the corner. Nick never made his bed. Even when the maid cleaned up his room, we made sure to mess it up to get Mom and Dad's attention. But his bed was perfectly made, all of his stuffed animals lined up on his pillows. I left my older brother's room with a sickly feeling in my gut. Taking the downstairs steps one at a time, I made my way down to the ground floor, running past the previous floors. Nick once told me the story of the dead kid who haunted the second floor, and my imagination was definitely playing tricks on me. The ground floor was too dark. I crept into the kitchen, standing on my tiptoes to switch on the light. Mari said Dad wouldn't let my brothers out of the basement, but they were probably hungry, so I grabbed snacks for them. I took my time, making sure to add their favorites. Roman liked chocolate, so I dropped 2 candy bars into a small bowl. Nick was always fighting me for mini cocktail sausages, so, opening the refrigerator, I picked some out for him. Before I could close the door, however, I noticed something new sitting on the top shelf. It didn't look like food, a squeezy bottle of something poking from a small white box. I thought it was medicine, maybe for my allergies. But when I grasped for it, it was squishy in my hands. Yogurt or milkshake? I hated the texture. It instantly reminded me of jelly. I put it exactly where I had found it, shutting the refrigerator door. After gathering enough snacks for my brothers and a few treats to calm down Mari, I finally rounded the basement door, half of a cracker hanging out of my mouth. I turned the curved handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. Pulling it open, I slowly made my way down ice-cold concrete steps, wincing at the sensation on my bare toes. The old wooden door at the very bottom, however, was locked. When I risked knocking quietly, a familiar squeak caught me off guard. The door groaned, and I heard movement followed by a resounding knock. "Dad?" His voice was a sharp cry writhing with sobs. "Dad, please, I promise I've been good," he whispered. "I want to go to bed because I'm so cold and tired. I don't feel good." I could hear his teeth chattering. Nick's voice was barely a croak. I held my breath, clutching the bowl of snacks to my chest. "It's me," I whispered. "Belle?" I could hear my older brother's heavy sobs, his attempts to gag them with his fist. What are you doing down here?" I swallowed a shriek twisting in my throat. "I have snacks?" I don't want snacks." I never heard my brother cry. Nick was always the one teasing us for crying. I remember being scared of something in his cry, a tinge of something I didn't understand. I didn't realize I was shaking until I looked down at my own quaking hands, illuminated by the flickering bulb above. When I dared lean forward, something coppery filled my nose, thick and wrong and almost wet. The door jolted, groaning against the hinge, and I heard my brother slump to his knees, his head resting against the other side. "Can you ask Dad to let me out?" he whispered, his usually calm demeanor shattering as he let out a wet-sounding sob. "Belle, tell Dad to let me out now." His breath hitched. "Please?" Nick's cry dropped into a whimper. "Please, please, 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 please." He emphasized each plea, slamming his fists into old wood. "Please." His breaths were ragged. "I feel sick, Belle," he sobbed. "I feel sick. I feel sick. I feel sick." When the door bounced under the hinge, pressured by his weight, I found myself already taking stumbled steps back. "Nick," I found my voice, swiping at my eyes. "Where's Roman?" His response sent me staggering back, almost tripping over the bottom step. Nick's heavy breaths broke into sobs. "Who's Roman?" "Isabella." The booming voice sent me twisting around, a shriek tumbling from my mouth. I dropped the bowl of snacks, ceramic flowers shattering on impact, the contents, candy and mini sausages hitting the ground. Dad's looming shadow didn't have a face. He reached out and wrapped his arms around me. "You shouldn't be down here," Dad said, pivoting on his heel and heading back up the stairs with me pressed against his chest. The door shifted again, this time violently. I could hear my brother's voice growing more and more desperate, his panting breaths sending shivers spiderwebbing down my spine. "Dad?" Bang. "Dad, please!" he sobbed. "Please let me out!" Bang. "Dad!" His voice changed, twisting, contorting, changing so much I buried my head in my father's chest, clamping my hands over my ears. When we reached the familiar glow of the kitchen lights, I risked one last peek, but the door had gone still, and my brother fell silent. Dad slammed the door behind him, gently letting me down and locking it. "Dad?" I managed to whisper. He didn't even look at me. "Good night, Isabella." I ran upstairs before Dad could raise his voice, diving into my bed and throwing my pillow over my head. The warmth of my sister had gone, leaving my sheets cold. The next morning, I walked into a brewing argument between Roman and Mari over breakfast. Nick was in his usual seat picking at his breakfast. I took a seat in front of him, immediately leaning forward. "Are you okay?" I whispered, offering him my granola bar. Nick didn't look up from his cereal, stirring frosted flakes into a soupy mess. "Yes?" He cocked his head, frowning at me through half-lidded eyes. I lowered my voice. "Did Dad let you out of the basement?" Nick scooped frosted flakes into his mouth, milk dribbling down his chin. His eyes confused me, amusement and slight annoyance. "What?" he said through a mouthful. "What are you talking about, weirdo?" When I opened my mouth to respond, he giggled. "Bella's being weird again," he said loudly. "Mom, Bella's like drooling into my cereal." He pulled his bowl back in a violent jerk. "You're getting all your disgusting drool in my frosted flakes." "Gross!" Roman turned in his seat, his face smeared with chocolate. He shot me a grin full of candy mush. Icky drool-flavored cereal, Murray joined in laughing. Belle is secretly a panda bear. Nick dropped his spoon with a snort, reaching for his juice and drowning the glass. Pandas don't drool, stupid head. I'm not a stupid head. Murray hit the table, throwing a grape at him. He shot one back. I watched it bounce against her cheek. Well, maybe you're just dumb, Maribel. Stupid heads are dumb. I caught her grabbing a fistful of pancakes and braced myself. Nicholas? Mom warned from the other room. She was working in her office, but always managed to hear the four of us perfectly. The three of them collapsed into a fight. Mari instigated it, catapulting a pancake in Nick's face. He hit back with his cereal. Roman jumped onto a chair, cheering his brother on. I left the table with a tummy ache. I asked Mari what the games were, but she went significantly pale and immediately changed the subject. When I tried to ask questions, Dad introduced a new rule: no talking about the basement games. My siblings weren't allowed to tell me anything. So that was when I started to resent my father. Growing older, the basement games continued, but my siblings had no memories of them. When I was 10 years old, I risked it again and snuck down to the basement, this time armed with the key I stole from Dad's office. But when I opened the door, I didn't even get to see inside. Mom was already behind me, scolding me for being up so late. This time, however, I did manage to see the shadow of my little brother huddled in the corner, knees to his chest. Mom was pulling me back upstairs before I could ask what was going on. I had turned 13 when Dad revealed his full wealth to us, and how we would inherit his fortune. It was practically drilled into each of us. He made it a game, as usual, and this time I was allowed to participate. If you eat your veggies, you'll be getting your full inheritance, Isabella, he'd say when I was refusing to eat slimy-looking lettuce. When I did well at school, he would pat me on the head and say, if you do well, sweetie, you will be getting your full inheritance. As a teenager, I continued to investigate the basement games, but by now my brothers and sister were completely on board with these games. They were part of their daily routine, and there was no questions or complaints. I woke up and had breakfast. When I was getting ready for school, I would see my brothers in their school uniforms marching down to the basement, with Mari falling in line. I never understood why they bothered getting ready for school when they didn't even go. When I returned from school, the house was always silent, but I knew they were down there playing Dad's basement games. The three always appeared at the exact same time every night when I was having supper. Mari would join me, followed by Nick, and finally, Roman. As a teenager, I knew not to question the basement games or what they had been doing all day. I was on constant autopilot, too scared to say anything at all, especially when my siblings seemed unchanged. Nick nudged me with his hip when I ducked my head, trying to shovel cold pasta into my mouth before Dimitri piled more on my plate. I hated that they were good liars, so good at pretending everything was okay. I knew they weren't okay. The night before, I ventured once again into the basement, easily bypassing the lock. This time I saw a clinical white light. The room was empty except Mari sitting on a small plastic chair. She didn't speak to me, her eyes half-lidded, straying strands of red hair sticking to her forehead. Mari didn't move or blink the whole time, and when I was slowly reaching out for her trembling hands, I was being yanked back. I was sent back to my room with no explanation. The next morning, I was met with the same. They acted like nothing happened. Nick was 14, so it was completely insufferable at the breakfast table. What's your problem? He pulled my plate from me with a grin. When I couldn't bring myself to smile back, he rolled his eyes and blew a raspberry. Fine, I can ignore you too. He turned away from me, pulling his knees to his chest and shoving Roman off of his chair. Our youngest brother was 11, and also a crybaby. He'd burst into tears at the slightest prodding. Nick liked pushing his buttons, but Roman also had anger issues and was impulsive, often reacting before thinking. When he toppled off of the chair, he jumped up, red-faced, swinging his fist directly into his older brother's jaw. What the hell? Nick squeaked, nursing his jaw. Nick had gotten a little too used to swearing. He hit back with a yell, but was surprisingly the weakest brother. Roman was already waiting for a strike back. Before he could swing another punch, however, Dmitri, who had become an honorary father over the years, came running from the kitchen, already used to Maybank's sibling BS. Dmitri had to pull them apart before they killed each other. I hated them, I thought dizzily, my head spinning. Mari shot me a grin from across the table. I hated her, my own sister, for lying to me. But it wasn't just lying, it was being oblivious that they were lying. There were cracks, not just in their appearances, overshadowed eyes that stared at me for a little too long, clumsy footsteps that tripped and stumbled, and the worst, they were always shaking. But when I dared ask if they were okay, it was like they didn't know why they were trembling, like everything had gone dark the second they came back up from the basement. I would notice Mari crying in her room, but just like our parents, she was a good liar, especially with her smile. "I just broke up with my boyfriend," she would effortlessly lie, her eyes sparkling with tears. Mari was 12 years old, in the 5th grade. My sister didn't have a boyfriend. If she did, I would know. She would have never shut up about it. Roman was hyperactive the majority of the time, acting like he was on permanent fast forward. But after the basement games, I would notice him sitting eerily quiet, not saying a word until Nick antagonized him. Dead, almost vacant eyes just like Mari's, like he wasn't really there. The basement games started to last for days. Sometimes I wouldn't see my siblings for a whole week, and I was terrified. They had been acting less and less like themselves, like they were starting to shatter, coming apart piece by piece. They were like mannequins, sitting with me and eating supper, but there was nobody there. Nick turned from a sociable 17-year-old to a dead-eyed doll sitting next to me, staring down at his food, pale and shivering in sweltering summer temperatures. Couldn't take it anymore. I was going crazy. So I reported my own parents to the cops. I told them everything about the basement games and my siblings' slow unraveling from the age of little kids. I was interviewed by a woman with a kind smile who offered me chocolate milk and told me to take my time. I was halfway through my anecdote about the monster Mari talked about when a second cop wandered into the room and shook his head. The woman's smile started to shrink and she stopped offering me drinks. Apparently, 2 officers had visited my father, while 2 were interviewing my siblings. According to one officer, our house didn't have a basement. He also informed me that my own sister had laughed off my claims and insisted that I had a vivid imagination and liked attention. The female officer wore a tight smile. "You're lucky your father isn't pressing charges," she said, lightly shoving me out of her office, where I stumbled directly into an all too familiar face. Nick. Wearing his private school uniform, he was all smiles in front of the adults before leading me away, his grip tightening on my arm. He was hurting me and didn't even notice. When I cried out, he grabbed me again, sticking his nails in the exact same place. Nick had changed drastically over the course of his senior year. He was snappier, his tone cold and to the point. It wasn't until we were halfway down the street when he dug deeper like he was trying to hurt me. I caught his gritted teeth. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he hissed. "Do you hate Dad that much?" When we got home, Mari was waiting for me. She didn't speak, turning and walking away. Roman jumped out of nowhere, throwing a moldy orange in my face. "Yo, Belle!" he grinned, before grasping his own throat, pretending to choke himself. "No, Dad! Don't do that! I can't breathe! Dad, you're hurting me!" He ended his theatrics with an eye roll. "You must be desperate for attention, sis." Finally found my voice, caught in a shriek. "What are you talking about?" I lost myself in a laugh that twisted into a sob. "What the hell are you talking about?" I twisted to face both of them. Years of pent-up frustration, fear, and constantly swallowing it down and smiling, spilling out like magma. I felt it scorching my veins, a rich, burning heat bathing my face. "You've been playing the basement game since we were kids. You cried out to me. You were scared and wanted to be let out every damn time I went down there. You were always scared." Tears fell freely, but neither of my brothers seemed fazed. Their dark eyes glued to me like I was dirt on their shoe. I turned to Roman. "I saw you. I saw Mari. But you can't say it's not real because you're different. You're different and I lose a piece of you every day." I heaved a breath. "Every time you go down those stairs, you change. I don't know what it is. I don't know what he's doing to you, and it's driving me insane. Dad's been playing these games with you since we were little kids, and now you're trying to tell me they don't exist?" Suddenly, I couldn't breathe, watching my brothers exchange amused glances like I was crazy. I lost myself somewhere between grabbing a ceramic horse from an old cabinet and throwing it on the floor, a screech escaping my mouth, one I couldn't swallow or bite back, an unhealthy cry that sent me to my knees, sobbing. "Don't you remember?" I managed to choke out. "Dad locked you up. He wouldn't let you out. You begged me to let you out. You didn't even know who Roman was." Nick didn't move. "He's been hurting you," I said, swallowing another sob, forcing my fists into my eyes. "I know Dad has been hurting you, and I don't understand why you can't see it." I could see Nick's shoes through the gaps in my hands. There was a pause. The only sound was my disgusting, snotty sobbing. "Oh my God," Nick finally muttered. He turned away from me, pivoting on his heel, just like our father. "Get therapy, or leave," he said. "I don't need your weird fantasies ruining our chances." It took me a moment to realize what he meant. The inheritance. Instead of responding, I ran upstairs to pack my things. I was getting out of there. Whatever my father had done to my siblings, he wasn't doing it to me. When I dragged my luggage downstairs, Mom was waiting for me on the ground floor. She was wearing her lying smile again. "Isabel," she said, "your father and I have been talking and think it would be best, right now, to send you to boarding school until you turn 18. I heard footsteps behind me. They were already marching into the kitchen and down to the basement. I could feel myself splintering again, the urge to scream at them choking in my throat when I realized there was no point. "Isabella," Mom's voice echoed in my mind, "your father and I are worried about you. We just think it might be best for you." I nodded, refusing to watch them disappear once again through that door. "What about the basement games?" I asked. "Will they continue?" Mom's expression crumpled. "Isabella, I have no idea what you are talking about." She shook her head, her lips tight. "This is what I mean when I say we are worried about you," she sighed. "Sweetie, you can't create lies about your father and this family when you know they are a fantasy." I didn't reply, unable to stop myself from watching my father usher the three into the basement right in front of the two of us. That was the last time I saw my siblings. I went to boarding school for 3 years, turning 18. I wasn't a smart student, but my father offered my college of choice a worthy donation so I could feel smart. I expected at least some contact with my siblings over the years, but there was none. I stayed with school friends for holidays and celebrated my birthday by getting wasted with someone else's ID. Dad was good for something, and that was his endless supply of cash. I was in my second year of college when I got the call. "Dimitri, your father is dead, Isabella," he said stiffly. "The funeral will be next week. Please wear respectful colors and come alone." For my own sanity, I chose not to attend. I had no interest in going back to that house. I was expecting disappointment and maybe threats, and I was right. Aunt Daisy called me a freeloading witch and blocked my number. Mom sent a long text that I didn't read, deleting it and blocking her. I knew exactly what it was going to be, a passive-aggressive freakout telling me to come home and pay respects to my father. I did try and reconnect with my siblings, at least via phone, in my junior year at boarding school. I had to plan to get them out of the house and away from the basement games. I talked to my roommate about their behavior growing up, and she said exactly what I suspected. My siblings were being treated badly, and the basement games were something much more damaging than they were in denial of. She also noted what I found in the refrigerator when I was 7. "Sedatives," she said. "Did you say your older brother forgot your younger brother?" I nodded, swallowing puke. "Yeah, it's like you didn't know who he was. It sounds like your father was keeping sedatives in the refrigerator and regularly drugging them," she said, her expression darkening. "Belle, this is the type of crap you really need to tell someone about." Leaning forward, my roommate grasped my hands, squeezing tightly. "What did the thing in the refrigerator look like? Can you describe it?" "It was a squeezy bottle," I said, "but it felt like jelly. I don't know, it felt liquidy in my hand." She arched her brow. "Liquidy, eh? So, there wasn't a shot or maybe a small bottle?" Thought back to the white box on the top shelf. No, it was just a squishy bottle. It was like jelly. My roommate didn't respond. Leaning back, her gaze glued to me while I dialed my brother's number. He didn't answer. Nick's number was dead and Mari's went straight to the dial tone. Roman's did ring, but it continued to ring and ring and ring and ring until I ended the call and cut contact with all three of them. I should have paid attention to my roommate's expression, because the next day my school records were plastered over every bulletin board on campus, which also happened to detail the reason why I was sent there. Isabella suffered a breakdown after falsely accusing her father of several things. She has a colorful imagination and often lies to get attention from her family and peers. Despite this, she is a hardworking student and is making new friends. Underneath, scrawled in red, Psycho. I don't even know why I trusted the daughter of a singer with my private life. After that incident, I decided to leave my family in the past. That was until 1 year after my father's funeral. I was a broke student, had no job, and my landlord was a month away from kicking me and my housemate out onto the street. There was a small white envelope waiting for me on the countertop when I pushed my janky door open. I knew what it was the second I checked the back. Dad. Instead of my name or a note, a code was sandwiched inside a $50 note. This one was simple, coordinates leading me back to the house I grew up in. When I arrived, the door was already open, but I wasn't surprised. I was considered the least intelligent out of the four of us, and I did abandon them. I slipped through the door, suffocated with memories. The ground floor had not changed. It was still beautiful, oval-shaped, my mother's favorite chandelier looming above. When I turned around, I could see the height marker scribbled on the wall where Roman and I had measured our height. He was a toddler, trying to jump to be as tall as me, so naturally I marked him taller, probably because he wouldn't stop crying. Wow. The voice wasn't surprising, but I hated that at that moment. I realized I missed it. I couldn't help my body suffering a visceral reaction, tears stinging my eyes. I thought he was dead. I thought my father's basement games had killed him. Nick was standing in the doorway. As the oldest Maybank sibling at 23 years old, he definitely didn't look it. He hadn't aged a day. The worst part was that he looked exactly like our father, all the way down to the long trench coat and white collared shirts, hands tucked into his pockets, sandy-colored curls pinned back by a pair of expensive-looking Ray-Bans. But there was a silver lining. The dark shadows I saw in his teen self were gone. His eyes were full of life again, pricking with that energy he had as a kid. The vacant, almost cruel gleam was gone, replaced with amusement. I noticed his smile was a little too big. His sleeves were rolled up, a slight pinkish tinge speckling his cheeks. He took a step forward, swaying slightly. Nicholas Maybank was drunk. "So, you purposefully missed our dad's funeral, and yet here you are, making sure you get your cut." His mouth was upturned into a smirk. "I wasn't sure how low you could truly go after, accusing Dad of screwing with us and then abandoning us for 8 years, but wow, here you are, in the flesh." He cocked his head. "Did you get shorter?" I didn't care that he was being a douchebag. In 3 stumbling steps, I was wrapping my arms around him, letting myself break apart. I felt his entire body stiffen, like he wasn't used to hugs, which was crazy because we hugged all the time as kids. I waited for him to push me away, but his hand came down on my back in an awkward pat. "Why did you leave us, Belle?" I didn't reply, and I think we both preferred that. Nick pulled away, and I caught him swiping his eyes. "We're in Dad's office," he muttered, gesturing for me to follow him. Nick led me onto the second floor and into our father's old study, where 2 strangers stood, surrounding Dad's desk. The redhead awkwardly perched on the edge, swinging her legs, could not be Mari. She was ethereal, scarlet hair tied into a ponytail, dressed in a white pantsuit. My sister didn't even look at me, her gaze glued to a loose thread on her lap. The promise I made her even when we were kids came back in the form of a bile creeping up my throat. I left her with our father in his basement games. I left my little sister when she was already suffering. "Why is she here?" The guy leaning against a dusty curtain draped over the window with his arms folded could only be Roman. I last saw him as an empty-eyed mannequin staring straight through me. Roman Maybank had changed to the least, still hiding behind thick dark hair and freckles. I didn't recognize the crest on his navy blazer. Probably a private college overseas. No matter how hard he tried to hide it, my brother was still haunted by his childhood, already struggling to maintain eye contact with me, before averting his gaze with a derisive snort. He was the youngest, and as his older sister, regardless of the manipulation they were under, I should have protected him. That fact only hit me when his expression crumpled, his bottom lip wobbling. I looked away, my heart in my throat, my gaze finding the center of attention. The 2 single envelopes on Dad's desk. One was red, the other white. Nick snatched up the white one. My brother was ready to laugh, his eyes almost feral, lips spread into a grin. I could tell he'd been waiting for the inheritance since Dad announced it. He was greedy, pulling the contents from the envelope. He started confidently. "Hello, children," Nick read out, mocking our father's booming voice. He kept reading, and slowly, I watched the color drain from my brother's face, his eyes adapting that exact same gleam, the one I was so afraid of, what I had run away from. Nick continued, speaking through a cough. "You 4 want my fortune so bad." He dropped the letter, stumbling back, his eyes wide. "Oh no," he whispered, bending over and puking something slimy. Damn. "What?" Roman straightened up. "What does it say?" Nick swiped at his mouth, spluttering. He was shaking. "It says to kill each other," he said through a laugh. "Last one standing gets it all." He jumped up when Roman reached for the letter. "No, don't touch it." Something ice cold crawled its way up my spine. Was this part of the basement games? Is that what our father had been preparing for? Nick stepped back, backing into the door, his eyes unseeing. "I'm not interested," he whispered. You guys can kill each other for $4 million, but I'm done. I'm done, okay?" With a heaving breath, he twisted around, grasping for the handle. He twisted and pulled, but it didn't open. "It's locked." Nick spoke the words softly, before something twitched in his expression, and I remembered all the times he was locked in the basement. He kicked the door, choking on a cry. Another kick and he was trembling, pounding his fists into old grains. "Hell, Dimitri, you bastard, let us out of here." Mari stepped forward to help him, but in the time it took for me to open my mouth to speak, my sister swiped a glass from Dad's desk, shattering on the edge and plunged the skewed edges through Nick's skull. I watched his hands loosen around the handle before falling limp. Nick didn't speak or cry out, scarlet seeping through his lips before he dropped onto the floor, dead. I could see the swimming red around him, blood pooling around my sneakers. Mari blinked, the glass slipping from her fingers, her mouth parting in a silent cry. She was covered in him, her white pantsuit painted in vivid scarlet, blood splatters on her cheek. She staggered back, her hands going to her mouth. "Nick, oh God, I wasn't thinking, I didn't mean to." "That's BS, Roman was screaming. I didn't realize until all of us did. Nick was dead and one of us was getting Dad's fortune. Roman was already diving onto my back, and all I could do was shove him off of me, before his snuffled sobs stopped me. More blood, this time running fresh under my feet. Roman Maybank had landed throat first on a particularly large shard of glass. He was dead and I had killed him. Mari was suddenly swinging at me with her weapon, clumsy and impulsive. I grabbed it, puncturing her throat, her warm blood splattering my face. When Mari's body hit the floor, joining Nick and Roman, I could do nothing but crawl, my siblings' blood wet on my hands and legs, snatching up the red letter. I tore into it way too fast, adrenaline forcing my body into autopilot. I sliced my fingers on the edge, but I barely felt the sting. A single bead of blood landed on yellowed paper. Paper cut. Dad's handwriting was scrawled across the page. "To my dearest children, congratulations! I leave you both a blessing and a curse I implanted during your birth. Use it well for the coming games." Movement caught me off guard. Mari's body twitched. I thought it was a trick of the light, but then her hand moved. Then her leg. Her eyelids flickered. Roman's head jolted back, the horrific sound of snapping bones filling my ears. I kept hold of the letter, inching toward the door. And to Isabella, the daughter of the man your mother screwed. Just as I thought, your siblings would self-destruct. I've played out many different scenarios. This one was most likely. Nick's arrogance, Mari's impulsiveness, and Roman's overconfidence leave you my true heir. I leave you my wisdom and a new game. You have been waiting to take part for a while now. Well, here you are. Survive my 3 newborn children and take it all. The house and my fortune is all yours if you get out of my house alive. Start in the basement, Isabella. I flipped over the letter, caught off guard by Nick's entire body shifting, an animalistic snarl ripping from his newly elongated teeth. The lock on the door clicked, swinging open. Where it all started. Underneath. I carry life within my veins, yet I feel no joy or pains. I hang to serve both day and night, giving strength when life might sway. What am I? Solve me, and you may survive game number 1. And that's the end of the story. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you're on YouTube, like this video. If you're anywhere else, well, like, subscribe, follow, do all the things. If you like these stories and you appreciate listening to a voice that is not AI garbage, then this is the perfect place for you. If you'd like to support this channel and the fight against AI by being an actual real human man, then go to Patreon and become a patron, because it helps keep this channel going. So I appreciate you for being here. If you'd like to send me your story, you can at storiesaftermidnight.com. Join our Discord if you'd like to, all the fun things, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I guess I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for being here. Take care now. Bye-bye then.